The Outsiders had been brought to my attention from a bunch of little 12-year-old kids who wrote me a letter that that was their favorite story. And I really felt when I made The Outsiders that I was making it for those little kids who had written me the letter. The style was extremely saccharine. The boys were reading Gone with the Wind during that book, and so we thought, we would play with photography and even music that was, sort of like Gone with the Wind like. So, I was sort of struggling with Outsiders at the time because I thought it was too candy-colored and too sweet, and the emotions were too on the nose. And the truth of the matter is that it takes, God knows, 6 months to make the movie, so you're imprisoned in this style. And it made me want to have the antidote, is the only way I can express it, which I found in Rumblefish. As I read the book while I was actually shooting Outsiders, I felt, well, here there's a character, motorcycle boy, who's colorblind, so that whereas Outsiders was all color and Technicolor, Rumblefish could be black and white because he couldn't see color. Then I began to fantasize while I was still shooting Outsiders of how much fun it would be to do Rumblefish, because I could do it like, in my mind, I thought of it as an art film for teenagers, that it could be like a lesson in lenses and photography and unusual angles, and specifically broaden the cinematic language for teenagers. Cinema that was more active with your imagination. I never had an experience where I began to fantasize about making a different movie right while I was shooting another. In fact, I suggested to the studio, let me go right from Outsiders to Rumblefish, and they were very adamantly against that idea. And so I got a different studio to finance it, and I did it just as I wanted to. I went right from Outsiders right into Rumblefish. I make it a point to deliberately try to discover and verbalize what the theme of the piece is, and preferably in a few words, before I really have done the screenplay or gotten too deep into it.
Time is a very peculiar item. You see, when you're young, you're a kid, you got time, you got nothing but time. Throw away a couple of years here, a couple of years there. It doesn't matter.
I use whatever that theme is as the way to try to decide what the style is, because I always fancied myself as someone who made every film in a different style. Apocalypse is certainly very different than Godfather, and so forth and so on. That I myself personally, and even as a young person, especially liked movies in which you could see the director's style applied without shyness, that you really could see. I mean, if a camera angle is this way instead of this way, it's obvious that it's crooked, so that there's a sort of unabashed freedom to doing that. And I saw that in Stanley Kubrick, John Frankenheimer. Usually those films were a little more audacious. Certainly Citizen Kane, very notably different than just the kind of normal filmic storytelling. I liked theatricality, and the most famous director of a peculiar cinematic style in my teenagehood and after would be Alfred Hitchcock. And Alfred Hitchcock got his whole style from the German Expressionists because he was sent to Berlin when he was about 19 and hung around looking at the work of Murnau and Fritz Lang and Pabst and those people. So a lot of the style of Rumblefish did come from the silent era, and specifically Germany. Youth films had always been from the Bikini Beach films and Where the Boys Are, even artistic films for teenagers, Rebel Without a Cause. They were always depicted in a kind of high school color, where the color was an important part. So I was intrigued with the idea of making a film specifically for teenagers and making it in black and white. I'd always thought that black and white was really a style of a poetic realism. Like View from the Bridge, it was like real people, the dock workers. whereas in fact black and white is not realistic at all. And even when in college I would do plays, and I did a production of Streetcar Named Desire that was like a black and white movie in the theater. Except when Blanche appears and she begins to put Chinese lanterns, little blues and pinks as she extends her fantasy world to this more black and white world of Stanley Kowalski, until at the end when he rapes her, and they take her to the asylum, it's all black and white again. So I was conscious even as a student with the effect of black and white as something super real. It was unique to Rumblefish in that whatever I was thinking of at the moment, I would do it that way. So everything I did had a peculiar style or slant that even I didn't totally know, but that felt right for that material. I've done every kind of rehearsal you can imagine, and always very different for each project. In Outsiders, I did a lot of work to try to energize the discrepancy between the poor kids and the rich kids. I had the actors playing the rich kids in better accommodations with nicer cars picking them up, and they got more per diem, so that the poor kids would be resentful. And so the director has a lot of tools to play with.
You're Rusty James. Biff Wilcox looking for you, Rusty James.
I'm not hiding.
He says he's gonna kill you, Rusty James.
Saying ain't doing.
Shit.
And I always was trying to arrive at a style of acting that would be good for the story. With Rumblefish,
Sit down.
we were even shooting some of the rehearsals, and we had invented this thing that enabled us to take a picture. Say there was a picture of a house with a fence. We had the ability to have the actor walk in behind the fence. And there might be in the back of my mind some scheme as to what this is going to result in stylistically, but it's more of a workout to sort of test every element of the project before you actually get to make it. I actively wanted there to be a digital cinema because I thought it was more promiscuous. You could do anything with it. Also, all of this always backs up my earliest wish to basically make kind of live cinema. I came from theater, and I was, kind of a boy scientist, and I was well aware that the technology was changing rapidly, and I could see that suddenly you could do little tests with photographs and chroma key and stuff. So I was always using the technology that was just becoming available.
That gang shit was out of style when you was 10 years old.
Oh,
Rusty
shit,
James.
man. I was fucking 11. I can remember. I was in the Swamp Babies.
Very often you arrive at certain ideas through solving other more vexing problems. For example, my problem was the wardrobe. Originally, everyone had thought naturally that as they were like a teenage gang, that they would probably have like club jackets, like the vampires.
Hey, Rusty James.
And somehow it didn't feel right to have all the members of that gang look that way. Although I had the character Smokey, who sort of represented my brother in the Wild Deuces. So when I decided not to have club jackets, then I said, well, okay, what am I gonna have? And then that set a process loose at trying to find an identity for each of the characters, because they weren't gonna just all be able to be in the jacket. So Rusty James arrived at a certain look that was very attractive for his youthful physique. He was a beautiful young man, and we put the club jacket on Smokey. But when it came to Motorcycle Boy, he had been the leader of the gang, but somehow just Mickey Rourke's unique personality, the more I thought about him, the more he somehow began to look to me like a kind of French intellectual. I don't know where I got that from my brother, no doubt, because I knew about Gide and Camus and Sartre from hearing my older brother who was very interested in them. So in the effort to solve what these guys were going to wear, which we had to decide because in 2 weeks we were going to start shooting, ultimately Motorcycle Boy emerged dressed more like a kind of existential philosopher. Because he had gone alone. He had been the leader and the toughest guy in the gang when Rusty was a little kid, and then he went off, and when he came back, he had clearly gone into a new realm. What could that have been? And I just took it there because I think of the influence of my older brother, who was, you know, the first intellectual in our family.
Hey, what's the matter, man, huh? Really, you feeling all right? How come the tank is separated?
These are rumblefish. They'd kill each other if they could.
Yeah?
You boys gonna buy a fish or something?
The whole tone of the acting in Rumblefish is a little strange. I mean, it's still sort of realistic style, but it's as though people are occupying a dream almost, where they're saying things you don't quite understand what they're talking about. And all of it's like that. The scenes with Diana Scarwood,
Move it, just...
the old lover of Motorcycle Boy sort of haunting the streets, it's all like a dream.
What is this, huh? Huh? What is this? He just gets back, you're already hanging around bugging him. Why?
Why do you dislike me so much?
I don't feel it, strictly speaking, realism.
Your friend?
No, I didn't say I dislike you. I just don't like substitute teachers living in my building, all right?
I think of that sequence where they go over the bridge to the black neighborhood. And it's very important to realize that that black neighborhood didn't exist. We just went over the bridge and created a black neighborhood. But it was very central because of the wonderful people who populated it and what their behavior was during that sequence. The way the men and the women and what they were doing and how they were relating to one another, and combined with the style of the lighting and the music, made it, I think, sensual. But I mean, ultimately, sensuality comes from the cast and from the people and from the extras who are cast members in a sense. Very often a younger filmmaker gets partnered with an older cinematographer, and the cinematographer is traditionally the master of the set. All the grips and electricians, really, they are the photographer's crew. They're not the director's crew. And I worked with some great photographers, but they were also stern, you know, so that I was constantly in a feeling of frustration that I want to do something, and if the photographer frowned on that idea, it kind of wouldn't get done. So on Rumblefish, I always wanted to break free of all those people telling me what I couldn't do. And I was blessed to have a wonderful photographer collaborator, and Steve, I had learned already, having worked with him on Outsiders, he was very clever and you know, UCLA colleague of mine, and technically very adept. And so when it was a question of how we would do some of these things, I leaned on him, and he was very forthcoming.
What you got?
And like, problem of how are we going to do this sequence where he gets knocked on the head and he rises out of his body? Well, this was not a big budget film, quite the opposite. And how we conceived of using a Chapman boom and putting the body of Rusty James on a kind of a body molded tray to hold him, so we could just raise him up and fly him around and stuff. All of that was done step by step, you know, to do it without digital effects and do it more with old magician tricks. Made me excited to want to go in that direction. Also, Rumblefish used super short lenses. And graphically, a short lens, it tends to bend the reality into a sense of more space than there is, and there's a certain distortion which is also beautiful.
What are you doing here? Those are my mother's cigarettes. What are you doing?
You know, when I was a girl, my boyfriend...
There was existing in Hollywood, among the good scenic designers and production designers, many techniques such as painting light and shadow on walls to create lighting effects that were in fact artificial, to get dramatic effects and stuff. My attitude, I know, and I'm sure I encouraged all of my collaborators, we want to do everything. And I would do anything that was perverse and different and seemed to be leading in a new direction. But it also makes the process sort of one of a kind. You know, you feel like a pioneer. And my instincts have proven right more times than wrong. But telling Chris Marker he could shoot the second unit of Tulsa didn't work out too well. You know, I liked Chris Marker. I liked him personally. I liked his films. And I thought, who knows, maybe he'd be able to contribute. So I invited him to come and possibly shoot second unit material of Tulsa. But when he got here, he thought Tulsa was so ugly, he just turned around and left. But telling a guy who was a drummer that he could write the score, who had never written the score, that worked out really well. Originally, I was going to write the music, and we had, right here in this room, we had established a kind of motif. It was a string bass, which I played, and Roman played this kind of figures on the drum.
Mr. Harrigan wants you in his office.
Rusty, you've been here to see me before.
Don't call me Rusty.
And we had this prototype, and when we hired Ford Coppola to be the instrumentalist to play those very elaborate kind of rhythmic patterns, and he got into it and said to me that he wanted to do the score, and I said, okay. And I thought he brought tremendous range of colors, and it's a kind of haunting movie rather than, you know, like Outsiders, where there's just flat out heartbreaking emotion. It's elusive what Rumblefish is saying, you know, the relationship between these brothers and the father, this dysfunctional family. It's not on the nose. So the music is not on the nose.
Close to your home.
You have this palette of these wonderful talents helping guide me to what I was looking for. You know, a person like me, I just do what I feel like doing, and I don't often have a good reason. I really liked Rumblefish, although I was very disheartened when I had a preview for the audience I had made it for, namely, you know, high school kids, and they just didn't know what was going on with it and rejected it pretty I think, conclusively. But that's why I was so touched to hear many years later that this group of Chilean and South American teenagers discovered it on their own and made it an important film without even knowing who the hell I was. But Rumblefish did partly confirm to me that I should make the things I want to make the way I want to make them and accept the consequences, that was a better choice than to try to behave and get a job and do what the producer wants me to do. And I've said 100 times, the biggest risk is to live your life and not use it for doing all the things you like to do.